Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life.
This episode is sponsored by Gripp. Got lots of people, places, and things to track? Gripp is the easiest way for farmers to track anything important to their operation. With flexible QR code tracking, keeping digital records is a snap with Gripp's operator-first mobile app centralizing alerts, reminders, electronic forms, and team conversations. With simple month-to-month pricing and no long-term commitments, Gripp can transform and streamline your operation so that you can focus on what's most important, growing. For a limited time, get 15% off any monthly or yearly subscription at grip.ag/pricing with the code THRIVEIN25. That's GRIP.ag/pricing with the code THRIVEIN25. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. Today, my guest is Tracey Widmeyer, who is the co-founder of Gripp. Growing up on a farm in rural Wisconsin, Tracey saw firsthand the challenges of keeping farm records organized. Now, he's combining his farming background with technology to create simple, effective tools that help farmers centralize equipment records, maintenance logs, and communication. Tracey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Give us a little bit about growing up on a farm.
Yeah, so I grew up about an hour north of Milwaukee. My dad's farm, we did about 120, 150 chickens a year for the community. We butchered them ourselves. There weren't big processing plants for that. So, 8 or 10 chickens a night after school with my brother and my dad, it was sort of the summer routine. And then we had sheep for a bit. We've got heifers and then some row crops. And then my dad's farm adjoined a farm, his dad, my grandpa's farm, who had 300 head of dairy. So we shared a lot of equipment and labor and things like that. It's just part of how we grew up, very blue collar. My dad worked off farm, so we ran a backhoe for 35 years of his life, but was up early to farm and went to bed late to finish at chores and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about what you felt like that instilled in you.
Yeah, I was telling somebody this the other day. I was coming out of a small rural town. I went to college and felt a little, not necessarily embarrassed or ashamed, but my farming upbringing. I was always the farm boy in the room for the most part. And, until I graduated college and went into the workforce, I didn't really appreciate the work ethic that it taught me. And I quickly realized, I could, work circles around folks or just be smarter, work harder. And that oftentimes was the difference between, success or not, which a lot of folks just didn't have the luxury of growing up with. So I tell my parents often, and since that early 20s, like, thank you very much for the way you raised me. Mm-hmm. It's just provided me to outpace, a lot of folks that just didn't have the benefit of that.
Okay. Talk about kind of like how your career where it took you.
Yeah, so have been an entrepreneur most of my career. So I sort of cut my teeth. I grew up as a software engineer and quickly moved into working for startups, building software, and just loved that pursuit of technology, squared against a challenge that hadn't been solved yet and trying to figure out, unique ways to win in the market. Eventually in 2008, I started my own company. We ended up doing 3D market research for brands. So we created like 3D technology for large brands to visualize different things on the shelf. So pricing, packaging, promotion, wayfinding, end caps, all to get you to buy more Pringles or Bud Light or, whatever it was that they were selling. A lot of science goes into that shelf that you're not aware of. But so we had software around that. We raised a lot of capital to fuel that, and was there for 12 years and loved it, learned a ton, and eventually left and went into private equity. Was doing some technology roll-ups, and one that's particularly interesting was a waste management company. So we had a little sensor on the hydraulic ram of, say, a Home Depot compactor, 40-yard compactor that could tell Waste Management when it was full based on the pressure, instead of them just emptying it twice a week, whether it was full or not, and charging the customer for 2 trips. So we had fun doing that. We built that, ended up selling that, but it was the first time in my career where I could take a laptop and a crescent wrench, put it in a bag, put my boots on, and walk to the customer site, to put
Yes.
these little transducers on. I was like, man, this exists. This is great. Like I feel like I'm on the farm again, but I get
Mm-hmm.
to use this technology that I've built up over time to, really square the two against each other and figure out, novel ways to do things. And, eventually was doing another private equity roll up, but, was just missing that experience, and, led me to Grip. I got in contact with Purdue University. Purdue has a little venture group, but their whole mandate is to spin ideas out of agriculture that have been underserved or unsolved using their whole network.
Mm-hmm.
They do farm visits, they walk agri-food plants and people all across the landscape. And the idea for Grip had escaped that process for them, and they have a little bit of seed funding, and they look for people to run it. And I just had serendipitously got connected to them and said, hey, I still own lots of equipment today. I got a couple of backhoes, a dump truck, some tractors, a Pettibone, like all sorts of stuff. I got Sharpie notes written on the filters of my skid loader. So I get the problem. And because I have been in technology, I think I've got a decent idea how to solve it. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing led to the next, and we sort of kicked Grip off the ground, and here we are today.
Okay. All right. Back to that compactor company. I'm just trying to envision that. Was that something that you kind of just like put into a port and then it was hooked to some sort of cell that would go off the cell network?
Yeah. So we would physically unhook the hydraulic tubes to the ram. We had a little
Okay.
transducer that went in between there, but that pressure sensor was connected to a little electrode that would basically measure the pressure of that ram as it went forward and back.
Mm-hmm.
And so that little sensor then was connected to exactly what you said, a little cellular connection. We had some that were connected to phone lines,
Mm-hmm.
and we could calibrate it and dial in remotely and sort of dial it into the right pressures for that particular hardware. But yeah, it would call home a couple times a day, report the pressure, and then we had a whole notification system for your waste haulers to come pick it up.
And I'm assuming, was that a product that the waste hauler would install or the Lowe's Home Depot side would install?
It was we had a couple of different folks. So it was either the waste hauler themselves. We would sort of resell through them.
Mm-hmm.
We would sell direct ourselves too, so not through a distributor or network, and we would install some of them. That's where where I could bring my laptop with me and a couple of
Mm-hmm.
crescent wrenches to install it. So we had a couple of different strategies for getting into market.
Interesting. Yeah, I just find all that stuff fascinating
Yeah.
and how it works. All right, so let's move on to Grip because that's what we're here to talk about. So, share a little bit about. You said it got kind of spun out of Purdue there, and then what was kind of like the first step that you were like, oh my gosh, this is an idea that we have to move forward with.
Yeah, so as soon as we got spun out of Purdue, we incorporated the company. I hired a co-founder who had worked for me at that 3D company, and we immediately went on the road to go talk to the farmers and the folks that had provided input to Purdue, just to
Mm-hmm.
validate and go a little bit deeper on discovery. And one of the things we quickly learned was basically farmers struggle to track basically lots of things across their operations, not just the stuff on tires, it's fixed equipment, it's facilities, grain bins, forklifts, storage, packing, distribution, you name it. Like they have trouble keeping little notes. And part of the reason is there's a lot of point solutions in ag, as you may know, where you can get very deep in tracking your tractors with like JD Ops or a
Mm-hmm.
fleet management solution or a food safety app or a grain bin app or whatever it is. And all of a sudden the farmer's got like 10 different apps he's bringing to his operation. And the same people are generally the ones that would have to use those, right? Because
Yes.
an operator on the farm is also the mechanic. He's also hauling grain. He's also doing 10 other things. And so it just becomes a little onerous, and that's why what we saw is they're still on paper, they're still maybe using a spreadsheet and paper books and whiteboards.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the first novel thing. The second thing was farmers would tell us, hey, when we talk about what we have or where it is or who can operate it. It's generally in text, WhatsApp, or personal email.
Mm.
And so our thought process was like, well, wouldn't it be interesting to keep those conversations accessible to the operation? That's where a lot of the tribal knowledge ends up, that you lose when somebody moves from your operation to the next or exits farming. And so we've introduced the broad-based asset tracking to track anything that you think is important that you can put a QR code on, but then said, hey, through those QR codes, let's enable like a WhatsApp or a text thread for each piece of activity that happens on that asset, that tractor, the truck, the semi, whatever it is. And so now you've combined like the tracking that you might get in a traditional asset system or a spreadsheet or in your paper book, but now the conversations that happen are centralized too, and that digital profile for that piece of equipment looks a lot like a Facebook profile. It's a lot of pictures, it's conversations, it's manuals and documents and costs and invoices and all the things that you want to use to plan better, to train people, or to look at your costs, or lemon pieces of equipment or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk the full breadth of this. So you mentioned tractors, obviously, pieces of equipment, vehicles, grain bins, basically like buildings.
Buildings, yep.
Yeah. What else are people tracking?
Packing line, so apple packing lines.
Okay. Yeah.
Irrigation systems. So we've got both, row crop using center pivots, but also we've got a cherry orchard that's got Schedule 40 PVC in the ground,
Okay.
with little, risers that have a valve that goes on and off. And his case is unique because he didn't want to spend the, multi-millions of dollars to outfit something with IoT sensors in a low cell area. So he's already got people going to the orchard every day. He's got 16 different orchards.
Yes.
So they scan the code to note that they turned it on and off through the grip tag. And so he gets his water usage reports through that mechanism without the added expense.
Okay. All right. And then this information can be used in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I mean, part of what we've helped solve are, some of the audits and certifications that growers go through. So whether you're organic or not, you typically, especially in specialty fruit, veg, nut, you've got auditors coming on site depending on what you're growing or where you're located, once a month or a couple times a year. And it's surprising how much of that process is still inefficient. Like we've had so many of our customers say, well, the auditor shows up, he's just got a checklist of things that he wants to see on a piece of paper, and so we sit around the table and there is no real guidance in that process on tools to make that easier, or what form those records need to take. So we spent a lot of time allowing that lightweight sort of structured information to be collected, whether it's organic tomato planting records or amendment records for greenhouses in terms of when you move from the greenhouse to the hoop house to amend with lime or whatever it ends up being. So that information, because we say we'll track anything, we can create these lightweight structured inputs.
Yes.
Has really helped these operations, collect information they didn't think was possible in the efficient way, but also look at ways to streamline and communicate better with their team.
All right, and so there's two different ways to track it. There is these QR code like that I'm sitting here looking at right now because they're on my desk.
Yep.
And then you can also do a physical, just like an input that you just like type in, right?
Yeah. So you can scan the QR code, which is good for operations that have more than a few people and let's say 10 or 15 pieces of equipment. We're the vanity names of that thing, like Michael's truck and Tracey's tractor and Sally's forklift.
Yes.
That when that gets exhausted, when you get more than a few people and a few things, then you scan the code, you're right in front of that piece of equipment's digital profile. But you can also look those pieces of equipment up in the app, search for it and get to that same
Yes.
profile.
Yeah, and then you can also use that to like input data on that piece of equipment.
Yeah. So you can keep something as simple as a basic note, almost like a little digital post-it note.
Yep.
You can upload your manuals, parts lists, standard operating procedures, which we see a lot.
Okay.
To clean the cotton combine if you're crossing different seed varieties, for instance. And so you can input all that information so it's readily available. One of the things we're going to be adding soon is the ability to create little videos. We get this quite a bit from farmers who are like, hey, can I create almost like a little TikTok video that I can stamp on that piece of equipment on how to inspect it or how to start it because it needs a
Oh,
can of ether,
yes.
or how to maintain it or where the grease zerks are, so that when I hire somebody, they can simply scan the code of the 6 pieces of equipment that they're going to be maintaining or operating, and like almost look at a set of videos that are going to help them understand what they have to do. Otherwise, like, you've got to drive to that location. It might be 40, 50 miles away, that type of thing.
Yeah. Oh, it just pulls out. Yeah, pulls up the exact information you need for that exact thing right when you're
Yes.
there. I think when we spoke earlier, I was mentioning how we needed a piece of equipment and it had been broken earlier in the year, and we had forgotten about it. And of course, the exact day I needed it, it was literally like we needed it exactly right that day. So I spent the next 2 hours driving around, literally, to the repair, to the like parts store, then to my repair guy, and it literally ate up half my day.
Yep.
And it could have been done by my maintenance guy in an off day if I just been able to put that information out to him.
Yeah, and what we try to do with Grip is make the operators the eyes and ears of the operation, because they're the ones using your stuff every day. They see, hear, smell things. There just hasn't really been an efficient way to report those. So with Grip, again, scan the code, log that information, and at least so you don't forget about it, because that's half the battle. Sometimes we hear so many times the story you just mentioned where, God, we admired this situation through planting and harvesting, and by the time we got to next spring, like, we had forgot about it, and that's when the disaster happened.
Yeah, yeah. So you did mention like organic records. You have people that use this for organic record systems?
Yeah, I mean, really, we've got one grower in Tennessee. He basically said, my auditor showed up this year and he told me, I'm gonna, your records are good enough to get you certified this year, but there's sort of a clamping down of the information we need. We need more information. So my guess is if you present the same information to me next year, like, it's not going to pass certification. And that puts this guy out of business because he's 100% organic.
Correct.
And so we're helping them. We've got little stakes, if you can imagine, like the little stakes that you would put in front of a plant or a flower
Yes.
with a little Grip QR code on it. Those stakes can be moved around the hoop house depending on the crop, because you're turning crops every 50 to 60 days. And that becomes the window into logging the amendment you did, when you planted, when you harvested, how much you harvested, the weight, the number of heads, like,
wow.
all that stuff has been
Yes.
done. You lug a cart to some house where you've got a scale, and now you got to remember where it was, and it just becomes a mess. And so we're working with them to try to streamline that. And he's got some Spanish speakers, I believe, on his operation. We do automatic translation on some of that stuff. You got questions, so it's there's a lot of streamlining to be done there. Which is cool.
Fascinating. Okay. Now talk a little bit about kind of like what the culture is of the company. It seems like you guys are very farmer focused.
Yeah, I mean, my co-founder is up in Bellevue, Seattle, area, so he does a lot of our tree fruit down in Yakima. But he had worked for me at my previous company, but I didn't know that he also owns a residential construction firm out of New Mexico. He's had that for like 10 or 15 years. And so the point is, like, he resonated with the problem as well. And so it helps, to be able to understand the problem in depth, experience it firsthand. But neither one of us, having construction and farming background, it's very natural for us to walk onto the farm, put the boots on, shake folks' hand, and really be able to resonate, which sometimes is half the battle, because there's so many companies out there we see, or farmers tell us that this guy tried selling me something, but he's never even driven a tractor, never been in a field.
Yes.
And so you just miss some of the nuance. You try to tell yourself that you're going to explain to a farmer how to run their operation, which just doesn't work very well in ag. And so, yeah, we every feature we've built, everything on the roadmap are things that we hear directly from our customers. We love going out on site and putting our hands in the dirt.
Yeah. Now talk a little bit about, so you've got the app, you've got the QR codes, the little tags, and then you also have obviously I'm assuming a computer aspect, so someone can sit down at a computer and kind of sort stuff and see what's going on.
Yep. Yeah, so the computer, the desktop version of that runs in a browser, and it gives you more ability to sort of group and filter and export the data, based on what you're collecting. And so it's a way to onboard some of your people as well. So we see folks like using that as the export mechanism for Grip to take their data to their auditor or to other partners that may be in need of it.
Gotcha. And talk about, some farmers are not tech savvy. How easy is this to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time. It's probably the number one thing that we do is spend time figuring out how to keep Grip simple. And it's one of the things in the testimonies that we have in the customers is making sure it's as simple as possible and taking that to heart with our customers. So we model a lot of the input off of what farmers are using, which is Facebook to upload pictures. They know how to take videos. They know how to chat, and so we try to model the input mechanisms on things that they already know, so we don't have to train. When somebody signs up for Grip, we basically send them a 15-minute video on how it works, and they've got their QR codes and they're off and running. And we support them right in the app. We're monitoring the accounts and giving them feedback, but we've been very happy with how it's resonated in terms of getting people to use it and how easy it's been. I think the oldest operator we have is in his mid 70s. And then of course, as you go younger than that, you get below 50 or mid 40s, like it becomes something that they seemingly have used for their whole life type of thing. But we spend a lot of time making sure it works that way.
Absolutely. And then you talked about some of the farms, kind of share some more success stories. I think one of the things you shared with me was really interesting is that literally all the people that started with you are still with you.
Yeah, I mean, we commercially launched in March of last year. We're on about 70 operations, and we're getting, a couple of signups a week at this point. And we've had 0 farms leave the platform. We have month-to-month pricing. I always tell farmers, if it doesn't do what I say it's doing, don't pay me next month. And we've got easy pricing, no setup costs. We make it as easy as possible to get started without an upfront investment. And so that's, I think, a testament to what we're building. And we've got, if you think about the spectrum of farmers, you've got row croppers on one end. They're doing 5,000, 10,000 acres with 5, 6 people and maybe 40, 50 things that they're tracking. Very heavily focused on maintenance at that point. And one of the things we've prevented for them is what we consider over maintaining. So many farmers will just run their tractor in once a year. Whether it needed or not, they'll replace all the filters, all the fluids, and you're $1,500 to $2,000 in at that point. And most of them know they could keep records in the book, but they got team members that don't do it. And so we just help them, prevent that over maintaining. And then when something does happen, like your story, it's making sure it's memorialized so they don't forget about it. And then you go to some of the specialties. So we've got a lot of apple, cherry, hop production up in Pacific Northwest. It's just a different animal with people, places, and things. Those companies are they're growing, they're packaging, they're warehousing, they're distributing. They've got everything from food safety to chemical inventory, and we're helping them track all those things. So there's just a different level of chaos, I'll call it. And then somewhere in the middle are your animal protein operations, your dairies, things like that, where they still may be growing some cover crops for feed and things like that, but they've got parlor houses and milking houses to maintain and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I actually, we're a relatively small farm, but we had to do some auditing for the FSA, and so we had to do an asset list. And there are literally about 65 different things that I should be putting tags on.
Yeah.
And we have a small farm, so it's amazing, And this is something like that you wouldn't think about it, but we're going to put a tag on every single computer, every single iPad. Just one of those things is like, is it an asset? Is it something we want to know what's going on with it? There's a tag on that.
We do have a fair amount of customers that are outside of ag. We don't necessarily target them today, but it's for those types of uses, commercial real estate or manufacturing as well. One of the things we don't do to farmers is say, hey, how many things do you own? Because it like drives anxiety. They just don't know, because
Yes.
you would have probably thought without counting those things, oh, maybe I got, 20, 30, 40 things. I'm a small operation. And then
Correct.
you
Yes.
look at what you've spent capital on, it's quite a bit more.
Absolutely. Now, you guys recently won the American Farm Bureau Ag Innovation Challenge. Talk about that.
Yeah, so that was a very exciting process for us. So basically, once a year, the National Farm Bureau will put together this Ag Innovator Challenge. It starts with applicants doing a video pitch, sharing a bit about their business. That happens every June. So last June we applied. I think they said they had a couple hundred participants. And then end of October of last year, they narrowed down the hundreds down to the top 10. And the top 10, we had a 7-minute pitch and 7 minutes of questions from a panel of judges in agriculture. It was 3 or 4 folks across the landscape. And we made the top 4 at that point, and then they invite you to their national convention, which this year was in San Antonio, and you get a 3-minute pitch on stage with no slides. And so it becomes a different way to think about communicating what your business does. So I brought some props. I had a paper book with maintenance records, a little whiteboard, a clipboard, to drive home just what we're solving and how widespread the issue is. But it was great. They had a ton of mentors they've introduced us to. The awareness has been great. It was such a phenomenal experience for us.
And I'm sure that kind of introduced you to a lot of farmers as well.
Yeah, a lot of farmers, a lot of the state level farm bureau organizations have reached out in terms of helping us bring awareness to what we do to their members. So that's been something I didn't necessarily expect, but a welcome sort of way for us to build awareness in what we do, because most of the time when I explain what we do to farmers, they're like, oh, I just didn't know something like this even existed. I've been looking for this, or and so it's for us, it's spreading the word is a big part of our forward-looking mission.
Absolutely. What trends are you seeing right now that you may be implementing into your software?
We're getting asked by a lot of farmers if they can bring, we call them like trusted advisors of the farm into Gripp. So what I mean by that is, like, we've got a couple of large apple packers up in Yakima. The same mechanical engineering company services both their packing lines. And so they're saying, hey, when this guy comes out to my operation, can he denote or memorialize what he did right on that Gripp tag, so I can leverage that information too? It's a stamp of the invoice or a picture of the invoice plus notes on what he did or how to prevent it. The same guy drives his truck 5 miles over to the next packing house, and now he's got to contribute information to a different operation. And so that
Yeah.
network is something we're actively building. Even something, so we've got some short line manufacturers. One is a grain bin company in South Dakota, and they sell their grain bins direct. They don't go through a dealer network because they don't sell enough of them, and they're struggling to communicate and support the farmers that buy their equipment. There's some electronics that's a little more complex to configure, and so they're going to be putting these tags, Gripp tags, on their equipment as they manufacture it. And it's going to preload with all the tips, tricks, manuals, the videos, and all the stuff that the farmer would want at his fingertips. But because we've enabled that communication, it gives the farmer the ability to reach out directly to the manufacturer with questions, and then the manufacturer to have some visibility to the farmer to say, hey, it's 2025, it's March, like, here's your, based on how old your equipment is, here's the maintenance routine that you want to do this spring to get ready for planting and harvesting. So that supports those folks better. You can support them remotely in a way that had been re-diagnosed in phone calls and emails, again, not centralized for the farmer, and just strengthens that relationship with the owner and the manufacturer.
Absolutely. Talk about the farmers that are using it. Have they talked about like the time they're saving, or just like to me, I think it would just reduce stress.
Yeah, that we consider that the peace of mind, just to know what's been done, what needs to be done. There's a lot to be said about that before you realize even that Gripp is a product that's available for you. Those are the pains and the stress that drives some farmers day to day. And so once we solve that, there's this implicit feeling of like, oh my God, like I feel like I can relax a little bit. And that, so that the peace of mind along with the team communication, especially where we're translating between Spanish and English automatically, that has provided a lot more communication on the farm than you would typically see, because most people felt like they didn't have a voice. And then some of the hard costs, I mean, the over maintenance, is a big one. One of our customers is using us to calibrate their 5-pound bag weights that they sell to, apples to Walmart or Costco or whatever. They had been collecting that information on paper books, but nobody, whoever collected it wasn't their job to look at the trends, and nobody paged through 100 sheets of paper to understand a trend. They've realized that their bag weights are over by 16% sometimes. And so when you're doing lots of apples like that, that's real money that was escaping the operation. And so we get simple things like that you just wouldn't know where to look to find. That now becomes much more obvious.
Where do you see Gripp going in the next couple of years?
I feel like we've got a lot to tackle inside of ag. I mean, I'd love to sort of build Gripp in a way that brings the network to the farmer, eases the operation stress, brings their trusted advisors to the farm, to just make their information a lot easier to digest and plan with. And I think there's opportunities for us to solve this for other industries as well. There's a lot of small to medium-sized blue-collar industries that, frankly suffer from the same problem, where they can't afford the high 6 or 7 figures, software to maintain equipment. They can't hire somebody full-time who's going to sit in the cube and maintain it. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities there. But, within ag, think about the things we're solving for dealers and OEMs and the irrigation specialists and the third-party mechanic. I think there's just a better way for ag to communicate and manage your operation that provides a lot of opportunity for us.
Absolutely. Well, Tracey, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you sharing about this, and we're excited to get it and put it together on our farm. But I'm sure farmers are going to find this super helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed it today. Thank you.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.